Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome back to Meet the Editor. Well, it's almost really how I write combined with Meet the Editor, because of course editors are also writers. And we have with us today Fatima Elkalay. I didn't get to hear if I pronounced your name right or not, so you can tell me in a minute if I've made a mistake there. Fatima is poetry at Rowayat Magazine, and I'm just going to read a short bio about her. She is poetry editor. She holds a Master's of Literature in Creative, or MLit in Creative Writing from Central Queensland University. Her work has been shortlisted for the London Independent Story Prize and the Arab Lit Story Prize for short fiction in translation. Her first collaborative collection, Dessert for Three, combines fiction and memoir, and was published by Rowayat in 2022. So all that sounds super interesting, and I'm really curious to know about how you got into writing initially, because I'm assuming that happened first and then editing came later.
Very much, Medina, for having me on board. Okay, so my name is Fatima, and I was born in the United Kingdom to Egyptian parents. So you could say like I'm British Egyptian, because I grew up there as well. And basically, I started writing at a very young age. I started writing when I was 7. And it's just one of these things, I would say, you know how they say, like, your pets adopt you, your pets choose you. I would consider that writing chose me, because I do remember very distinctly that before I did my first piece of writing, which was poetry, I was waiting for something. As a small child, I was kind of the child of immigrants and kind of lonely, and I wasn't particularly articulate, as a child. So I think I was just waiting for a way to express myself or to find my purpose, actually. Yeah, so it really began then, and it kind of became a purpose. That's where I started off. There was lots of things in between. There was, like, in my teen years, I was more into like journaling, and then I moved into short story writing. But the interesting thing about the editing is that it didn't start off literary editing at all. It wasn't for any creative writing. I started editing for an environmental development company, which received a funding and international funding and aid in Egypt when I first got married after I graduated. And what that did was help with the surgical side of things, to really cut things out. But it didn't, the precision, it wasn't the the initial sort of when you kind of harvest it all and then you through it. No, it was more like the later stage of trimming and cutting. And I had a very tough boss who was always like, everything we edited, she would go over and edit it again. And I often wonder what the point is that she's cutting out words or changing things. At first it looks as if they were exactly the same. But then I realized with time that it just makes it so much more powerful when it's succinct. And that's what that's where the editing started. And for many years after that, I was editing, like I freelanced as an editor for like mostly academic things, even when I left this particular job. But there was always the urge to go back to, and of course there was my writing on the side. I am not a widely published author, but I do write a lot, and it's it's mainly because I find that I think that the joy and the connection of writing is a very personal thing for me. Like a lot of people do ask me why I'm not more widely published and widely known, especially like with my peers and stuff, because it does seem that I don't publish much. But this is for now, I would say this is my second point of waiting. Like my first point of waiting was at that, without realizing it as a child, I was waiting for something. And I think up until then, I've been waiting for something else. And I would say that I think it's unfolding for me. This is my like personal writing. And I think that recent events have made something slot into place. I think this is what I've been waiting for almost like a fruition of my writing. Like when I know when it's ready to release. Yeah, so that's basically how I came to be an editor for Rowayat. I think it began like as my role as a poetry editor and as a like, although I do edit fiction writing as well, slash fiction mainly, but like all fiction. I think it emerged from, and this is maybe a tip if someone wants to get into editing, it's like, you start with your peers, you can be a reader, you can, do other people's, work, being a beta reader, that kind of stuff, before you get into something a little bit more serious. And that's how you hone your skills as you come along. So yeah, that's how it starts.
This is really interesting. I love how you describe the waiting and the sort of the incubation of writing, and how it doesn't always have to be out there. I think there is a lot of competitiveness, or not necessarily competitiveness, but that feeling of, you have to be out there all the time, and you have to be pushing, and you have to be entering everything, and it can be very draining as well. And I think there's so much beauty in holding it back as well sometimes, and letting it really come to fruition in the way that you want it to. And I think especially if you're doing something that's very innovative or very just new, that nobody has, like very original, by necessity you have to kind of let it germinate, right?
Yeah, it's true. It has a certain sanctity about it as well. I don't know, it's just very hard to release it before it's fully right. But I just feel that. And there's this is something I'm actually working on, because it's not recommended, but I will tell you that I have this ritual where on the odd occasion when I do submit, because I very rarely do submit my work, although I have a lot of work. I have this ritual where I submit and then I pray that it gets rejected. I don't. So it's very strange, but it's like it's not ready yet. I shouldn't have sent it, and it's funny that I can decide when someone else's work is ready, but not my own. That's something.
That's really interesting. And I think it does also tie into the editor's role, because like to write alone, writing as it is a pretty solitary thing, unless you're like writing for TV and you're in a writer's room and you've got 5 people throwing ideas around and scribbling on chalkboards and stuff. But what I have found as well is that like you have this idea going into writing that you're just going to make this thing and then you send it off and it's going to get published. And actually it's this really collaborative process in the end, because there are holes in your work that you haven't seen, or there's repetitions, or there's inconsistencies, or there's something that you just didn't see it because you knew what you were trying to say, and an editor will come along and go, oh, hang on a minute, this doesn't make any sense. And it's kind of horrifying to think, well, that could have gone out, and readers could have been having that experience, like, oh, this doesn't make any sense. So that's something that I think writers, especially starting out, have to kind of grapple with and get used to. But yeah, I think it's really important as well to I'm really glad that you shared that it's very hard to know when your own writing is done. And this is part of the role of what the editor is there for. And I read recently I was looking at chapbook submissions, and they actually said, don't worry about it if it's not totally polished. I think this is something that also holds me back is, I have to polish it, I have to edit it, I have to make it really perfect.
Mm-hmm.
But in a way, acknowledging that it is still got some room for improvement, then it liberates you to sort of say, well, I'll share it, I'll send it out and see what happens, rather than I have made my magnus opus and it'll not be touched afterwards, because it's quite shocking when somebody does edit your work afterwards. So tell us a bit about Rowayat and what the magazine publishes and what you do for Rowayat. Oh, I can't say it. I'm sorry, I'm fasting. Rowayat.
Yeah. So Rowayat started off during the Egyptian Revolution back in 2011, and it was in print back then, and then like they had I think 5 issues, and then they like had a bit of a hiatus for a bit. They went. Shireen had to actually like pause for a bit, but she relaunched 2 years ago, and we started off like we really are catering for the region here in the Middle East, but also Indigenous people and minorities and diasporic writing, and the global South. We're really looking into being, an anchor for writers, and I think it's really important now as well, with everything that's going on. So we have made a statement, put it out there. I see that you've also made a statement, which is super important. And so we publish poetry, short fiction, novel excerpts, interviews, creative nonfiction. We do the whole lot. It's not specialized in poetry only, and it's not. We welcome established writers and also emerging writers. We are interested obviously in political writing, feminist writing, and it's very inclusive as well. We're very inclusive.
So it sounds ideal. It sounds like our dream magazine. We should all be pitching to Rowayat.
After the relaunch, our first issue, we're kind of we've had several changes of we have visiting editors every issue, but I've been with them since we relaunched. So yeah, I'm one of the constants with Shireen, and obviously just trying to feel our way around things. But I think that everything kind of has some glitches, but I think we're getting there as well. And we do mentoring. We do mentoring for emerging writers, and we have an open call also for readers and voluntary, volunteers and stuff. So we have that stuff as well. Yeah.
Amazing. It sounds really dynamic. There's a lot happening. It's not just a magazine. It feels bigger than that in a way.
We want to be a community, really, and to have, to pull people in, and I think it's really important as well to be that person. The thing is, if I start to talk about my editing process as well, or did you want to ask me something else?
Please. Oh, yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. I'm actually a very generous editor. So when most of the time, when I have submissions coming in, I wouldn't turn a piece away if I detected just even a few lines actually, that actually pull me in. Obviously, like if you can hook me with the first line, that's excellent. But if if there's something there that is like in the process of, that sort of, it's germinating, and I feel there's something there, and it's worth holding on to, then I usually like contact the author with my edits and my proposed edits, and say, I'd like to work on you with this. How would you feel about this and that? I mean, for example, one poet submitted this poem, and reading through it, it was very interesting. But because like we go to a first reading and then there's several other readings, it's very rare that a poem will be just rejected from the first read, unless it's really, it's just really not there. And eventually I realized it was just only these 4 lines in this really long poem that stood out, and that was the poem. Everything else was just fluff, really. It was just unformed, and it's just this in the middle, that those 4 lines were amazing. And obviously it needed a different title, so I did that, and I sent it out to the poet, and she said, oh wow, it's a completely different poem now, like, because everything else is gone. But she accepted. Some people don't. Some authors feel offended, like they feel, no, this is not my poem, this is not my mission, this is not what I started off to say, so they refuse. And it has ended up like we've had, obviously because it's a stage where there's more than one editor and we have to collaborate in deciding, and there have been some poems that I weren't in love with that did end up making the final cut, and because the author didn't refuse to budge, and someone else thought, this, no, we want this poem in, so we said, okay, I concede. so yeah, so it's not always, I mean, some editors would say if it's not well presented, or if it's not ready, then don't waste your time trying to edit, because it's just too much work. And it was, I remember for the first issue, we had something like 300 submissions, and I had to plow through all that, and imagine like having to edit all that in about a month. But eventually, obviously, not all of them made the final cut. Some of them were deferred. Some of them we had to send very encouraging rejection letters, and asking them to resubmit afterwards. Well, because obviously, we're only having a certain number in the final magazine.
Wow,
I think like 20 to 30 pieces or something.
that's extraordinarily generous with your time, because normally, I mean, I know a guy who has a magazine, and he hires readers, and they have huge amounts of, normally when you look at these sort of poetry magazines, even just online ones or on print, they say we get thousands of applications, so don't waste your time if it's not really amazing, it's going to blow us away. But like, to actually spend that time to try and work collaboratively with those artists or those poets to improve their writing, I think that's with you. And of course, thank you for giving bless you for giving encouraging rejection letters, because that's the bugbear of writers.
I think it would be it's actually one of our it's on our like we plan to do this, is to have a service maybe to help writers improve, like to give editing services, or like feedback, just feedback, this is one of the things that we've proposed, and we're just kind of we're planning to do. So I think that as far as it's very personal choices sometimes. As I said, there's this poem didn't really, it wasn't for me, but someone else really loved it and they decided that it should stay. So it is, as you said, very subjective. For me, what I personally like is I love strong imagery, and I love it when an image is kind of transcends itself. Really, it's doing a lot more than just creating an image. That it's it just really it takes you somewhere else. I love that's the kind of imagery that I like, and it's not overworked. Obviously, it doesn't. It's not about putting too much effort into it, so that obviously there's effort, but the image itself is like not overdone. It's not like almost trying too hard, gimmicky almost. No, so no, I like sort of, and I think that it's. You improve the more you write, obviously. The more you wait, if you like, you wait on your writing, and you write some more. But it's there are recipes, but it's not about putting all the ingredients together. I think that we do put all the ingredients together through our writing journey, but in Arabic we have a word for like making it your own, and it's nafas. At least in Egypt they say nafas. Nafas actually means breath.
Yeah, but like nafs as well, like self, right?
I beg your pardon?
Like nafs also, like something
Oh,
is.
nafs is the self, yeah, and nafas with an a, not nafas. You probably write it and transliterate it nafas, is your breath, nafas. And they say, like, you might find this amazing meal, it looks amazing, but when you taste it, you say it has no nafas, it has no breath, it has no life. So it's like you're taking the ingredients and following the recipe, but making it your own, making it like personally yours. And that comes with obviously practice. You might need to make it a few times. It might be perfect the first time, but I think what nefas is here is the passion for what you're doing, loving your subject matter or the theme that you're writing about, and it really shows. That love is conveyed, I think, on paper. You feel it. It's capturing a moment, capturing a topic, just a scene. You feel it. You feel that something came from the heart. And obviously, one of the things about that, and that's understandable for someone who doesn't want to give up their poem and doesn't want the editing. It's like, I've worked so hard on this turkey, and all you want is the stuffing, and then like, so it's nobody wants that. So unless you don't mind, but so yeah, basically, yeah, it's understandable. I do understand when someone doesn't want to budge, but we can discuss it. Like, what is it that you wish to achieve here? If they're willing to to do a little bit of adjustment to make it a better poem, then yeah, we can still keep the turkey.
Just maybe trim off a bit of the fat on the edge that's gonna keep the buttery.
I just realized I've been talking about food too much. It's too early in the morning.
Oh, it's really great. I love how you describe this, the nefes. I think this is like a kind of it could enter the poetic sort of vocabulary, I think, for, you know, like we have this vocabulary of all these different sort of, you know, anaphora and syllogism, and I don't know, like all these sort of words, zeugma, that people use in poetry. But actually the nafas is what binds it together. It's kind of like the creation story in a way. Like, I don't know if I'm stretching this a little bit, but you know, the creation story from the Quran, in which Allah takes the earth and then breathes the breath into it. It's like the earth is being brought together from all these different locations, and that's material. You've got to breathe something into it so that it has life. And that's something that's quite, it's quite hard to explain how you do that, because like it's easy to just teach, you know, grammar and, you know, vocabulary and, you know, all the sort of usual recommendations, checklists, you know. But I also do, I agree with you that I think that poetry needs to be something more than just a checklist, because something that somebody makes because they've learned how to do it, they were taught at GCSE or A level or at university, it might be great on paper. And like you say, like it can be overdone as well. It can be gimmicky. And there's something there about, so I'd love to ask you about what your thoughts are on how we, or how does one bridge the gap? Because Arabic obviously is, Arabs are poets since day one. Persians also natural poets. So many of Muslim cultures around the world are so drenched in poetry, and we have such long traditions of poetry. But contemporary poetry is something different. It's like a, how do we bridge that, or do we need to bridge it? Maybe it's not necessary. I'm just very curious about how Muslims can be authentic. So I think that's a very important part of that nefes, right? To have a poem that is really, it has your fingerprints in it, you know, that it's really your own, to remain authentic without necessarily leaning so much on the traditional. Or maybe we can, maybe that's part of what needs to be, you know, presented as poetry, or how much of it we have to sort of sacrifice in order to be acceptable in a kind of contemporary poetry world. What do you think?
As Muslim,
Yeah, I guess as Muslims specifically.
I think, I mean, I think being just authentically ourselves is the most important part of it. That maybe like maybe not necessarily following the traditions, you know, like just follow what um, we could make our own actual sort of hybrid forms, or I totally believe in that. I think one of the things that that I do love is hybrid forms, because I feel that having a poetic voice is um, more important even than actually writing poetry itself. Having that poetic voice, because it will translate into everything. It will even translate into your life view, how you speak, you know, everything. And even like I also I paint as well, so um, bringing that together, even if I don't introduce my artwork into my writing, but to think in pictures and to you know, like convey that in in a poetic manner is I think the best thing you can do for yourself as a writer. And actually, you know, the Quran is full of that, full of metaphors, and it's amazing. Really, I think you just really need to like slow down for it and look at the imagery, and again that the very encompassing image. I don't know if I've actually answered your question, but I think the most important thing is having that poetic voice to be able to come up with maybe something new. Again, not to be gimmicky, but to kind of liberate yourself from the forms that are expected. although I mean, I would say that poetry is really changing, so it's accepting more and more different forms, and the hybrid forms are very, you know, because I do write flash fiction as well, and flash fiction is, I mean, it is that that place between um, uh, like prose poetry, and you know, it kind of like a connection place. Yeah, so yeah, and I think also as Muslims, it would be a really good collaborations, I think, as well, um, together as writers. Um, I don't know if there's much out there that's already. Maybe you could. Do you have any examples of collaborative work from
Collaborative
Muslims?
work, I think that's something that we could totally foment, because that's part of what we want to do as the Muslim Writers Salon. Is we also are all about not just developing craft, but also building community. And I have often wanted to impulsar this. I don't know what the word is in English. Yeah, foment or encourage people to collaborate. And I think collaborative writing is very interesting. I did a collaboration of poetry with art last year, and with an artist, and came up with, so I wrote poems, and we made them like we were inspired by Andalusi manuscripts of agriculture and botany. So she used like handmade hemp paper and painted in this very kind of stylized way using watercolors that looked a little bit like the medieval style. And then the poem was the text. So it didn't look like a manuscript, but it was sort of inspired by. And
Mm-hmm.
that was really fun to do. It was so enjoyable to do that together. But I think you do need to have the kind of container, or whether it's like an artist residency, or it's something that encourages that and facilitates it and makes it happen. Because um and I think one of the issues as writers or as artists is, getting the idea into manifestation. That's the whole difficulty. That's the work. Is like you can have a wonderful idea in your mind, and then but making it get out into the world is the difficult part. And with a collaboration, you have two people who are perhaps both like that, and so it multiplies by two the confounding factors. And but I think it's incredibly it's a tremendously what's the word, I want to say, kind of fecund, way of producing something, because suddenly you're in a conversation with another person, and it's not just all on you to make this thing. And also the other person can give you a accountability, like, hey, where are you at with this thing? I need this for Thursday. And then you can work together. So yeah, I really love I love that you brought that up, the collaboration point. And also to hybrid poetry as well. I think, Muslims and, well, people from the global south generally, of whom, many Muslims um, are producing a phenomenal quality of writing. I mean, I think that in terms of just what we're seeing in contemporary poets, but they're people who have gone through MFAs usually. I feel like they have gone through a master's program, which maybe wasn't really tailored to them, and they just sort of had to do it anyway to learn from these people who were not from the same backgrounds as themselves. And there's challenges in that as well, because you can feel excluded, you can feel not understood. What you're trying to achieve might be just not on the table. Um, oh, thank you. I'm sorry, I've not been reading the chats out. Let me go back a
Yeah,
moment.
yeah,
LJ said
have a look.
about how, going back to the writer editor practices, how extraordinarily generous that is, especially in the context of contemporary writer editor practices. Yes, I mean, I've done editing, and honestly, I edit when people pay me to, because I mean, I do it for friends as well sometimes, but it does take time, and it is work. I do know that Frontier Poetry and a few others, they offer a paid, feedback service, and they'll give a page of feedback, or 2 pages of feedback, depending on how much you pay. Yes, nafas, as in your voice, your sense of self. So brilliant. I just think that the voice is really the
Yeah,
key to it. I absolutely love what
I
you've
love
said
that
about
too.
And
sense of self.
there was a course on Masterclass, I think it was called, by Joy Harjo, who's one of my favorite poets, and he the course was called something along the lines of thinking in poetry. So it was about like having a poetic vision, not necessarily making the poem. And I really think this is a very beautiful and fascinating way to approach creativity, right? To look at the person who's being creative first and foremost, and their sense of self, who they are, develop that, and then, you know, pouring that out into a poem is is perhaps easier. Maybe it comes more easily if you have that voice already in motion. And like you say, it applies to so many things. And I'm just, my brain is going in all different directions here because, you know, thinking again, going back to, we mentioned earlier, the situation right now in Gaza, and how, you know, activism and just an awareness of a political situation or humanitarian situation can filter into everything else. So all the choices you make when you go to the supermarket, you're looking at what the brands are, where they're made. Am I supposed to boycott this person, this company or not? But not just that, it's the conversations you have with people. It's the way that you relate to your family members. It's literally, it can be anything. So in that same sense of like starting with the who, I suppose, and then getting to the what afterwards is perhaps, yeah, just how I interpret the way that you describe that. And I really value that approach. And Nafisa also says, yes, she loves that, having a poetic voice, of thinking pictures. And especially if you do a lot of imagery in your writing. I mean, yeah, there are people just sit down to write, they don't really have a big clear idea in their mind, and it becomes clearer as they go. Even artists as well. This might sound like a bit of a random tangent, but I recently watched the Dark Crystal series made by Jim Henson, and I watched the making of afterwards because I loved it. I loved the movie, the original movie, but the making of was so fascinating because it was based on the drawings of this one guy. I forget his name. He says he doesn't have an image in his mind when he starts to draw. He just puts the pencil on the paper and something comes out. It's only by drawing it that he gets clarity of what he's drawing, which I found very interesting because you think that someone would have a clear idea in their mind and then they try and translate that onto the page. But for him, it wasn't that at all. It was vague. And so it was the act of moving the pencil that caused that image to emerge. Anyway, I'm just rambling here.
It reminds me of an exercise that I did in a poetry workshop I gave, where I got the participants to listen to some music and to move with a pen with their eye or pencil with their eyes closed across a piece of paper and just like do squiggles and wiggles in time with the music.
Wow.
And then when they opened their eyes, they had to try and, I mean, see an image, you know, like single out even just a tiny portion with some coloring pencils or whatever, and then start writing based on that. And it's just trying to make different connections. It was very interesting, and it brought surprisingly amazing results. Actually, they came up with some very unique pieces.
Wow.
But it was like done in two parts, so that, you know, there's a space between both. They had time to like single out the image. Like I think someone got like a fish shape or something, and it just took them somewhere. Yeah.
Wow, how amazing. We have to get you to do a poetry workshop for us because that sounds so
thank
brilliant.
you. Yes, it's so yes, I see the whole, like, because they, you know, start with nothing and see what you get as well. Yeah, that works as well. I mean, you can feel passionate about something, but you can also start with nothing and move in. A bit like when you open the fridge and you say, "What am I going to make for sahur today?"
Honestly, I think
there I go again with food, and you're like,
that's one of the most creative things do it every day. Like people often say they're not creative, but you make meals, you make, something to
Yeah,
survive. If you have
yeah,
a family,
true.
you're constantly in creativity mode. And I love that. I think it's a really
Uh-huh.
important point as well. I mean, as an artist, I think an artist, you can see things from that perspective too. But it's nice as a writer to step out of the exclusively literary mode, right? And to do something I like to do, just, sit in a garden, sit in a place and close your eyes and just listen and write about what you hear,
Yeah.
because it just will, shift your habitual sensory patterns, I suppose. And yeah,
Mhm.
it can open up something that's different.
I thought as well, if you don't think in pictures, then you can kind of kickstart that as well. You know, if you don't, it doesn't come naturally. It comes more naturally to some people, but you can still, like generate it as well.
Yeah. I would really
Yeah.
love to do more drawing exercises actually, because that's one thing I found in COVID. I suddenly felt this desire to draw and paint and do things. And I don't have a bad hand because I do a lot of crafts. I do a lot of things with my hands. But I don't have that sort of like, oh, I feel like painting something today. Oh, I feel like drawing. I have this idea or this image in my mind and I'm going to start doing it. My youngest son is much more like, can sit down and draw a massive dragon and like a whole scene. He's got all these things in his imagination that pour out into art. But I really love these exercises to like stimulate, creativity in ways that
Yeah.
you don't normally do. And one guy, I used to live in a squat with a bunch of people in South London, and one of the guys was studying at Camberwell art school, and he got us doing portraits of one another without looking at the page. Just reminded me when you said that, and that is hilarious. It's one of the funnest things I've ever done with my family when bored, because
Maybe Picasso, maybe.
very Picasso. You get glasses up here and a mouth over here, and it's hilarious. Actually, yeah, you could turn
Yeah.
that into a poem, write about it, to do some kind of conceptual art and turn it into writing, because it's all connected in the end of the day.
Yeah. It's more holistic, really, I find it. So yeah. There were a
LJ,
couple of things.
sorry, LJ just put her hand up. Would you like to unmute, LJ?
I just had a quick question around this this concept that I've struggled to kind of wrap my head around when it comes to something that you were bringing up earlier, in this idea of how we push boundaries as Muslim writers, or how we collaborate within these contexts of sort of these ideas of status quo. And I'm curious to I'm struggling to make the connection about, I don't even know how to articulate the question, but why that is uh, the task that lays before us. Because I think so for context, I mean, you can't really, I mean, you see it in my image. So I'm a Black woman. I'm Sudanese. I'm Muslim. I have all of these identities that that are ascribed to me and that I claim, sometimes together, sometimes separately. Um, and I think something I've challenged myself to do is to kind of to ask myself, whose tasks am I responding to? Am I responding to my own? Am I responding to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's tasks? Am I responding to the tasks of this dunya? And sometimes it has to be all, sometimes it can only be one, sometimes there's a clash, sometimes, so on and so forth. And I kind of um recently have received some news in my personal life that has really narrowed my view in quite a has concentrated my perspective in certain ways. And I find myself just thinking so much is irrelevant. And I'm conscious that where I'm coming from is perhaps not conducive to understanding the richness of the question you're asking. And I just wondered if you could explore that a little bit further, because I'm struggling to grasp it.
So you, LJ, right?
Yes, LJ.
Yeah. Um, you're asking who we're responding to when we are in the writing process. Is that like whether we're responding to our own?
I'm more so with the question that was asked earlier about, you know, if I understood it correctly, how we push back against, or how we push against boundaries that are put in front of us, within what I understood was sort of the poetry sort of field, within writing, within the current culture, the literary culture that we exist in as Muslim writers. And so what I'm curious about is, whose task is that?
I think, I don't know, isn't it a very personal thing? Like each of us kind of handles it based on their own personal experience. I would say, like for me, I know, like I know where my my boundaries are in terms of my relationship with Allah. So when I'm writing, it's I know where, like where I can go as a writer and where I steer clear of, and that's basically you know, that's basically how I operate in terms of, like, if I'm speaking from a like on a moral level. Have I misunderstood the question? Again, I'm sorry.
No, I think I didn't explain it well. To put it, I was trying to be as like considered as possible in how I said it, but I was just thinking, why is this a question that we have to answer? Like the way that I thought about it initially was like the question of how do we address, like how do we push against boundaries in this current literary culture? And I was like, why is that something we have to answer? Like why can't we write, or why can't we explore our individual parts, or why can't we build community and create our own structures and work in those ways, rather than think about the ways that we must respond to or push against these boundaries? Like, why is that a task that's being visited upon us? Or is that, you know, and is it something that, in fact, even if it is being visited upon us in very tacit ways, can we just throw it aside and say, I'm not doing this? You know, it's, yeah, I don't know if that's helped. I feel like I initially started clear and then I again went off in a different direction. But does that make a bit more sense, or is that?
Yes, I understand. Yeah, I think, yeah, I suppose in that sense, yeah, we like, if we're answering to Allah and we understand our own boundaries, our own creative parameters as well, then yeah, we don't necessarily have to answer to anyone except ourselves and Allah. And creating, I don't know, I mean, the creative process that doesn't have to, I mean, you don't have to follow any formulas or any preset conditions, I think. So perhaps as Muslims, what we should be doing is like freeing ourselves from the expectations as well. So I don't know if that makes any sense, but maybe in the same sense that we need our own media, our own like our own voices to communicate our truth, then we should actually like generate our own standards of what constitutes acceptable or in art. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
Yes, it does. I was just actually trying to write that. Yes, it makes all the sense. What you're saying makes all the sense to me. And yeah, thank you very much.
I've actually thought about this in terms of media, that it's about time that we had our own media, and like creative arts as a medium as well, I think need to be liberated from that as well. I think that's starting to come out more, like quite recently. I have a few Palestinian authors that I know, for example, and they've started to make that shift. Not just in topic maybe, but in approach. And it can also be used as a form of dawah, I think, very loosely speaking. So yeah, it might not necessarily have the, like, you know, create the audience, or we might not have the following that that you want. What do you think, Martina?
Oh, this is such a brilliant question. Thank you so much, LJ, for chiming in on this. I think we face, you know, a literary industry that is almost entirely filtered through the white gaze, and you know, minorities are sort of sometimes served up on a platter for, you know, entertainment, or not just entertainment, but sort of exoticizing purposes. And I think that's so problematic. You know, the classic sort of thing of, you know, the Muslim woman who gets a book deal because she writes about being an oppressed woman. And, you know, and how, well, yeah, that may have been her experience. And so good for her that she was able to be authentic in what she wrote. But is that the only kind of narrative that we're allowed to offer as Muslims? And there are a few, I think there are a few kind of crossovers and breakthroughs. Sarah Ghazal Ali just put out a poetry book called Theophanies, and she's editor of Frontier Poetry, I think, and or one of the, I can't, she's the editor of some poetry prize and you know, magazine. And she's her poems do talk kind of quite specifically about her Muslimness and about faith, and I think there's one thing which is, you know, cultural experiences and identity and exclusion, for example, and marginalization. And we had an interview with Javeria, who wrote a book called Chai Cannot Be Made in a Kettle. And she wrote this brilliant poem, you know, we accept, what is it called? We encourage submissions from underrepresented writers. And in the poem, she breaks down, you know, how really we just want a particular kind of thing from you. And we want some working class anger, and, you know, but we don't really want to hear who you really are. And so it's something that is so deeply problematic about the literary world. And that's why it's so great to talk to you, Fatima, and hear about Rowayat, and see how these kinds of mediums can be created by Muslims and created by people from the global south, that without having to squeeze themselves into those kind of straitjacket of Western thinking, while at the same time acknowledging that, you know, we're writing in English, we're speaking in English, and or multiple languages, and coming from backgrounds that, yeah, maybe we've university educated in the UK or somewhere else. So that way of life has also impacted us, and it's also part of us. But it's this hybridization, I think that's the key word. I feel like that's my takeaway from what you said, Fatima, is also that, like, acknowledging and seeing that as a strength, you know, that like we do have people who have multiple, like if you're multi-hyphenated and you have different nationalities, and or, you know, one parent from here, one parent from here, grown up somewhere else, and on top of that there's gender and there's class and all kinds of other things as well, you know, to lean into that and see those strictures as like the wall that you sort of squeeze against, and you can build up a lot of power behind that as well, in a sense, even though that wall, it shouldn't be there. right? It shouldn't be there. It's wrong that it's there. But the fact that it is there, I think it does offer that. It invites pressure, it invites that pressure. And the people who take that up and produce that work are just so phenomenal as a result, because they have had to work so hard. So yeah, I don't know if that adds to what you were asking, LJ.
I think also maybe to like decolonize the art itself is really important. I don't think we need to explain ourselves. It's important to, like when we I mean, I know it's helpful, but I remember in one poem I submitted, it's actually a poem that I published. So I submitted, I had words in Arabic transliterated, and someone suggested that I just write them in Arabic and let the reader do the work. So I did that. I loved that. I just, instead of the transliteration, I put them in Arabic. And some people would argue, but that's just, that's off-putting. There weren't a lot of words, just a few words. But actually, no, I mean, I have to, colonized people have had to explain themselves all the time. And it doesn't, I mean, let them do some work, like the reader work. So yeah, I think
they can learn.
Yeah. Yes, I think maybe that kind of approach where you are proud of your identity and willing to put it out there without, being apologetic. Yeah, more of that needs to show up in the art as well. So, yeah.
Well, Fatima, thank you so much. We've pretty much come to the end of our time. But is there anything else you want to add, or any advice that you would give to?
I just have a few points, maybe that when you're writing your cover letter for your submission, at least for the way don't turn your cover letter into a CV. That's really important. By all means, do highlight some of your publications and what you've done in your writing career. Really don't turn it into like a whole list of all the things you've ever achieved. It doesn't really help. I mean, I've had cover letters longer than the poems. Speaking of which, there is a preference for shorter poems. What I mean by shorter poems is like maybe a page long, not several pages long. I've had like poetry dumps. I've had people with like 5 pages per poem and dense text. Yes. And no, it becomes very difficult. It's no longer a poem. I mean, well, it is a poem, but it's no longer a joy to read. Yeah, that's one of the things that that I would advise.
Well, that's a nice point that you said, that it needs to be a joy to read. I like that.
Yeah, not a joy.
Too long, it's not a joy to read. It should be a joy to read. Oh, I like that. That's great advice.
Yeah, and also if you can, like come up with that hook at the beginning, of course you will get a reading of the whole poem, but if you can capture my attention in that first line, it works exactly like fiction. And do kind of try to make it come full circle as much as possible, unless it's meant to be, like bottomless. It's meant to have kind of end on a bottomless note. Then do try to make it come full circle, and read your poems out loud to see how they sound to you. Record them and listen to them, and just to make sure that you've got the flow right. And And you know, obviously the whole line breaks thing makes a huge difference of how you transfer the meaning from line to line. And yeah, don't give up. And and also another tip, it's not absolutely necessary, but wherever you can, turn your similes into metaphors wherever you can, because I don't know, I personally have a preference for metaphors, and I know that there's a trend towards more metaphors and less similes. I just feel that the metaphor gets the reader to think more and do the unpacking, but the simile has done half the work, and that kind of, it's not just about getting the reader to work, but it's just really about engaging the senses more. You actually do all the connections yourself and come up with your own conclusions when it's not done for you. Yeah.
And there's pleasure in that, isn't it? Is that it becomes a joy to read.
Yes, it becomes a joy to read.
Well, it's been a joy talking to you, Fatima. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And I hope we continue to stay in touch and communicate. And inshallah, maybe you could offer us
I hope, I would love that. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your Ramadan.
Yes, you too. And may your fast be blessed.
Thank you for everyone who came.
And thank you to everyone who will listen after.